Hello, my name is Heidi Lucca-Redcliffe. Alongside Ewan, we both graduated from Swansea College of Art in 2024, and today I'm going to just talk about my practice, how it's developed with the support and opportunities Elysium has um, given us this past year, and I'll just be giving a little bit more context into my work that is currently exhibited alongside Ewan at Elysium Gallery. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about the one of the first pieces I made during the start of the Elysium Sculpture Award. So this piece was kind of a new beginning in my practice to really focus with a completely new material, which was string. For me, I really wanted to try something that just focuses on materiality and the sensory experience, very much working with intuition. And for me, string, it's such a ordinary material that is always around us through the clothing that we wear to then the connections with biology, with DNA strands. So for me, working with such a simple and not necessarily considered an art material or media, I just really wanted to take that material and experiment and play with it and have that openness. So this piece is completely made of knots, and that process this past year has been quite a exciting and obsessive process that I have just really found myself enjoying. It's a very it's very interesting how it starts off so small, and the more you knot and overlap and the layering, it can build up this really visceral and quite tactile form, and quite also abstract. So for me, that was kind of the beginning point of just working with a very straightforward material and just leading it through my own intuition and the sensory um, feelings. So here is a little bit of some documentation that I started a year ago, back in October 2024. So when I was making these knotted forms, I started to think if there was a way of documenting this process and having that visual imagery to share to an audience, but also for myself to reflect with. And for me, just having these past moments that I can see the original form and watching how the hands interact with material, because when I'm knotting, it's become such this natural and normal repetitive movement that I would sometimes forget that I'm knotting. So looking back at these images and the video that I produced, it just gave me that time to reflect and use that as that kind of like a visual documentation to explain to an audience. And here is where Ewan and I went to Charlottesville, Virginia, which was an absolutely incredible month of living and breathing art. And I think this was a really strong part of the year that just enabled us to work and experiment and make anything where we were. It was such an incredible opportunity that really pushed us to make and meet and connect and talk and challenge our practices. And for me, I find a lot of my work, because it's based off intuition and the gut and just that the phenomenological aspects of focusing on the self-conscious and not necessarily, always aware of what I'm making. I really wanted to document and gather as much of the memories, sensations, conversations, visuals that were surrounded myself and Ewan at Visible Records in Charlottesville, Virginia. So I found myself really falling back into love with drawing and those quick mark makings that really allowed me to quickly gather and document the space of Virginia. And alongside that, there was, during our time there, the weather was absolutely, it was really incredible, but also bizarre because there were days where it was really warm and days where it was snowing up to 7 to 8 inches. And I found myself absolutely mesmerized by icicles. I lived in the Airstream that month, and for me, when it did snow, the icicles that formed on the Airstream or around the rocky hill, like rock areas, I found myself absolutely just mesmerized, and I found those parts really influenced my practice both through the visual imagery but also through the textiles and printmaking. And I found my practice, especially during Virginia, I was very much bumping into different medias and having that experimentation to just make and respond and make and respond. And for me in particular, the sensory experience is so important, and to have this time to just continue developing that, but consider using different medias was absolutely just incredible to have. Here's our exhibition that Ewan and I presented at Visible Records. And again, it was kind of one of those opportunities for Ewan and I to play with our work and see how it could connect in different ways, if it was a visual or a contextual connection. And for both of us, it was just an opportunity to really take in the space, make, and have just a chance to play with installation. For myself, I love work that can be away from a wall and allow a person to interact with it, to walk around it, and have that time to fully absorb the entire piece. And for me, that became quite pivotal within my work in particular this year. I would I want to invite people in to touch, to look, and to be close with the work. That's a way for me to learn. So I really like that invitation to invite others to really observe and have that understanding of not only what the materials are, but the feeling, the sensations, even the smells. And for me, I can see the drawings really influenced my line work with my stitching. And it was very much similar to the knotting, but that repetition of the knitting, sorry, the stitching and the continuous line work, that playfulness, I think I really can see back in Virginia. So you and I both had a studio space during this year. And for me, I found the studio space kind of like a second home. So a lot of my work I make on the go and outside. And during that traveling to and from Swansea, and it was always really exciting because I'd always be bringing work back and forth to make on the bus or on the train or in coffee shops. So it felt like the space was always changing. And this was one of the last photos I took before we moved out in May. And I can see already here there's a lot of inspirations from the FAR residency that Neil Rock hosted us for the month, and aspects of the work that we got to do in university and different conversations that we had with mentors during the year. And yeah, just having that openness to create. And because you and I were both next door to each other, we had the opportunity to talk and share and have parts to experiment with and see how our work would work with each other. So this was the North Wales and Finnish Sculpture Symposium that you and I did for a week. And it was it was really, I went in quite nervous because when I heard what materials we were going to use, which was wood and cardboard, I found myself quite unsure because for me, I work with a lot of flexible and textiles and having that softness and sensitivity. And I really wanted to just knock that fear and work with a new challenge of a hard and kind of tough, heavy surface, which I'm not used to. And for me, I began to consider the wood as a material and how could I manipulate it and change it, similar to how I do with my textiles. And that's where I was introduced to chisels and carving and removing the surface. So I spent the week using the same repetitive motion of chiseling and carving away and having this tactile, textural, spiky, these spiky like poles, and no idea of how it would come together to burn, but the process and that time to really investigate the material was an extreme highlight for me. And before we burnt everything, I decided to incorporate a little knotted ball in the center, because for this piece, it felt like it needed that central, like, I don't know, not like a being or spirit of some sort, but it felt like something was needed in there to make it feel whole. And it was an absolutely incredible time watching all our sculptures burn, and the smell and how it was all just outside and away from a city or transport. It was just out on a farm. And here are the images that capture the moments of part of it that burnt and charred, and the smell. It was really interesting, the different scents from the yarn, like this natural yarn jute, to the wood and the crackling sound. It was an experience that had so many different sensory explorations that really excited my work. Here is the work from that we exhibited in Cork. Another opportunity to meet and share and talk, and it was one of the first times since February where I had my work actually interacted with and touched. And I think from that point, it made me realise for the PULP exhibition, it is really important for people to know to touch, because for me, that's how you learn. And I really wanted this. This was like that opportunity to see how people would react. And for me, I think this was that time where I needed to make it very obvious to interact with the work. Here, so before the exhibition came together, you and I did spend some time in the space to really take it in, interact with, and understand our work and how it will move in the space. So for me, I had majority of my work done, but there was a couple of pieces, which were my tights, that I felt like they needed more with them, because when we were looking at the lighting in particular, when we went into the exhibition, I had kind of three main focuses of what I wanted to achieve, and that was shadows, interaction, and materiality. And those are the three things that I really wanted an emphasis on. So for me, I started to change and cut and not be precious with the work anymore, like I did back in North Wales. So just allow myself to change things, edit things. How can the material be shown in a more visual way instead of hiding it? And here is, so similar to the first piece I showed, I found myself kind of trying to run away from the wall. So during this exhibition, I really wanted to play with little bits of pieces on the wall, but having that extension to the floor or the ceiling, and having parts that were visible to touch and feel. And this piece in particular, I left a lot of strands open for people to invite them to touch and to knot. And since going back to the gallery, I think last Friday, I realised a lot of the pieces were actually knotted, and people had changed this piece in particular, which made me really excited to see, because having that interaction from the audience, it's really important, and seeing how others perceive and take from the work. So this piece in particular, having those little changes meant a lot to me. Um, so with a lot of the materials that I used, a lot of them are recycled, and clothing that my parents or I wore. So a lot of the tights in this exhibition were actually my mom's and my tights. And it's kind of, when you use a material that you've worn or have already used, it's kind, you change, there's no, you don't feel precious of it anymore. And for this piece and many others, I just really wanted to experiment with stitch work and knotting and incorporating different processes that I experimented with in other work and kind of mold it all. This one's quite got this quite squishy but visceral, tactile kind of bodily piece, which then links to these pieces, which I decided to not incorporate any red yarn. For me, I really wanted to use the red lighting in particular to change it, use the lighting as a paint. For me, before, I would have considered myself as a painter, but since this year, I've really fallen into this obsession with using the lighting as a paint instead of painting onto the material, to allow the material to be its own pigment and just not change it too much and have that kind of naturalness to it, and then using that lighting to emphasize or change the visual look. And in this piece in particular, out of all the pieces that were made during this exhibition, this piece I started making in August, so it's one of the last pieces. And I think I can definitely see not a separation, but there's a it's different to the other pieces because it's got over, there's not as many knots in it, and the form itself is has this more bodily and uh, bodily look, which connects back to the history of Elysium and the stage, which I was more aware of since talking to John and other people at Elysium. This is a very, this was one of my favourite pieces for me because it took a year to make. It's constructed through knots and stitching, and the blue material is my father's old socks, which he chucked out. So this piece has travelled with me to and from the studio, to the beach, to so many different environments. And I can see, in particular, this piece, it holds a lot of memories, and how from conversations to the environments to feelings, there's a lot of that captured in this piece in particular. And for me, this one, this one, as many as all the other pieces, there was no goal or no cut-off point of where it is finished or done. And this piece, yeah, it kind of, I wouldn't necessarily call it done because none of the work in this space has this cut-off point. It's always going to continue with the process. But it's just a very sensory yet soft piece, which a lot of pieces are, in contrast to Ewan's work, which is quite hard and has obstructing manners. I like that duality with how our work worked within the exhibition. And here I found the space for Ewan and I was kind of like a connection point with our work. We both exhibited a lot of work from the ceiling, from Ewan's work, which were these long lead strands, to my kind of stretched out nylon tights and knotted stitched like bulb forms. It was a really interesting piece because this piece was responsive to the site. It has no form to it really. It's quite a, you nail it in and you map it out based on how the environment looks. So I think for this piece in particular, I was responding to the work that was already put up, and also just the structure of this space in the gallery, which was really unusual and different to the other spaces I had already exhibited. And here's kind of like the one of the main parts of the exhibition where Ewan and mine's work actually properly merge together. And it's a very interesting part where both of our works just we have similar motifs and ideas and that repetition of process. And for me, it was a really exciting time because this video that I took has been a year of making, and to actually see it alongside Ewan's work and how the visuals worked, but the context of that repetitive motion and the sensory experience, it was really exciting to see them beyond and kind of overlap each other. And yeah, thank you so much.